Imagine you are in a high-stakes firefight against your absolute worst enemy.
Right. The adrenaline is pumping. The pressure is just immense.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
you feel, somewhat secure because you have your closest, most heavily armed ally right there in the trench with you, supposedly covering your back.
Yeah, that's the ideal scenario, at least.
Right. But midway through the battle, you turn around and realize your ally isn't shooting at the enemy anymore.
Oh, wow. What are they doing?
Well, instead, they are quietly trying to, saw off the back half of the trench, claim it as their own private property, and steal your wallet in the process.
That is, I mean, that's a wild image.
Yeah.
But it really is the perfect illustration of how quickly a unified military front can just degrade into a battle for self-interest.
Yeah. And that bizarre, deeply fractured scenario, that is essentially the reality of the war in Yemen today.
It really is. Because, when we look at the conflict in Yemen, the popular narrative usually stops at a very surface level.
Right, people just see it as this tragic, brutal civil war.
Yeah. Exactly. The internationally recognized government versus the Houthi movement. But the international relations analysis we're diving into today reveals a much darker reality.
A far more complex one.
Yeah, we're looking at a war that has completely mutated.
So let's set the scene for the listener. The trigger event for all of this goes back to 2014.
Yeah, 2014, that's when the Houthi movement swept in and took over Yemen's capital, Sana'a.
Which just fundamentally destabilized the whole country. And then by 2015, you have this massive Saudi-led coalition that intervenes militarily.
And their stated mandate back then was very clear, very singular, really. Roll back the Houthis and restore the government.
Right. On paper, it was your classic proxy intervention.
Yep, textbook.
But our mission for this deep dive is to explore a conflict within that conflict. We're unpacking the intense fragmentation happening right now inside the anti-Houthi coalition itself.
Which is, frankly, the most fascinating part of the source material.
Right. I mean, we're talking about the escalating tension and outright violence between Saudi Arabia and the forces backed by the United Arab Emirates.
Because if you want to understand how modern proxy warfare actually functions, you cannot just look at the front line against the primary enemy.
You have to look behind it.
Exactly. You have to look at the massive fault lines developing behind that front line. Over the years, that initial facade of a unified Saudi-UAE coalition has just completely cracked.
And these aren't just like minor disagreements over battlefield tactics, right?
No, not at all. It's not about supply lines or radio frequencies. They are rooted in fundamentally opposing visions for the ultimate endgame of Yemen itself.
Let's get into the mechanics of those opposing visions because, coalitions usually only fracture when the survival phase ends and the what comes next phase begins.
That's a great way to put it.
So if we look at Saudi Arabia, their ultimate objective makes complete geopolitical sense. They want a unified Yemen.
Which they kind of need, geographically speaking.
Right, because Saudi Arabia shares this massive, porous, 800-plus mile land border with Yemen.
Yeah, it's a huge border.
Yeah.
And from Riyadh's perspective, having a fractured, chaotic neighbor is a permanent existential security nightmare.
They just cannot tolerate a power vacuum right on their doorstep.
No, because that's where hostile state and non-state actors can launch cross-border attacks. So a unified state under a friendly government is really the only acceptable outcome for them.
But then you look at the forces backed by the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and they are playing a completely different game.
On an entirely different board, yeah. The source material highlights that these UAE-supported groups are actively favoring southern secession.
Which means they don't care about the whole country.
Exactly. They have zero interest in pouring resources into unifying the entire country under the old government. Instead, they want autonomy.
They want to carve out the South.
Right. Specifically concentrating their power and infrastructure around the southern port city of Aden.
And this is where the geography becomes the most important character in the story for me.
Well, absolutely. Geography is everything here.
Because the UAE-backed forces aren't just trying to secede for the sake of, drawing a new line in the sand. They are targeting the real estate that holds actual global leverage.
We're talking about the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Yes! The Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Let's break that down for the listener.
So it's this crucial maritime choke point that connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden and ultimately the Arabian Sea.
And it's incredibly narrow, right?
Very narrow. At its narrowest point, it is only about 18 miles wide.
Wow, 18 miles.
Yeah, yet millions of barrels of oil and a massive percentage of global commercial shipping pass through that narrow waterway every single day.
So if you control the ports around Aden and you have influence over that coastline,
You essentially have your hand on the valve of global maritime security.
that is wild. So for the UAE-backed forces, this isn't just about local Yemeni politics anymore. It's about elevating their status entirely.
Exactly. If you are a proxy force or a newly formed autonomous region and you control a waterway that dictates the flow of global shipping, you are no longer just a local militia.
Right, you become a regional power broker. You can demand a seat at the international table.
The strategic value just cannot be overstated here. By focusing on the South and the ports, the UAE-backed factions are securing a massive economic and strategic prize.
But of course, doing that completely undermines the Saudi objective.
Oh, 100%.
Right.
Because every resource the UAE proxies spend on securing southern autonomy is a resource not being spent fighting the Houthis in the north.
This dynamic really makes me think of, like, a lifeboat scenario.
Okay, a lifeboat. How so?
Like, the coalition is a single lifeboat, and Saudi Arabia is the person desperately trying to patch the holes and keep the boat structurally sound so they can navigate through shark-infested waters.
With the sharks being the Houthis, in this case.
Right. Meanwhile, the UAE-backed forces are sitting in the back of the boat, completely ignoring the sharks and actively using a saw to cut off the stern so they can build their own private raft.
That captures the structural danger perfectly. Because the anti-Houthi campaign is quite literally sinking as a direct result of this internal division.
It's just falling apart.
It really is. The analysis clearly points out that this internal division has fundamentally altered the strategic map of the region.
They're fighting themselves instead of the enemy.
Right. The coalition is burning through military resources, time, political capital, just trying to manage its own internal friction.
So the original 2014 mandate of restoring the government in Sana'a has been almost entirely eclipsed by the struggle to keep the coalition from eating itself.
Exactly. Which brings us to a part of the analysis that honestly made me stop and reread the page.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say. The airstrikes.
Yes. Because the tension between these supposed allies hasn't just stayed in diplomatic back channels, it has escalated into actual lethal violence.
It's crazy. The source material details how Saudi Arabia has resorted to launching military airstrikes directly targeting the UAE-backed forces.
I mean, just think about that. The undisputed leader of the coalition is dropping bombs on the proxy forces of its primary coalition partner.
Wait, let me stop you there, because the logic here feels completely broken.
It really does at first glance.
Let's look at the stated goals outlined in the chapter. It says Saudi Arabia launched these strikes to maintain coalition cohesion, discourage competing military agendas, and contain the active clashes in the south.
Right.
But if Saudi Arabia wants to project strength and maintain unity, doesn't bombing their own allies make them look incredibly weak and out of control?
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't they just cut off funding or block supply chains or use diplomatic pressure? Why jump straight to dropping bombs on the people you are supposed to be allied with?
That is the crucial question. And to answer it, we have to look at the mechanics of leverage in international relations.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Think about financial pressure or supply chain blockades. Those take weeks, if not months, to actually change behavior on the ground.
Right, it's a slow burn.
And diplomatic pressure requires a willing partner who actually cares about your threats. Saudi Arabia did not have the luxury of time.
Because of the ticking clock.
Exactly. The analysis heavily emphasizes this ticking clock in the background of all this internal chaos.
Yeah.
The ongoing peace negotiations with the Houthis.
Ah, okay. So the peace talks are the catalyst here. Put us in that room. How does an internal coalition firefight change the dynamic at the negotiating table?
Well, imagine Saudi diplomats sitting across the table from Houthi representatives. The Saudis are looking for a diplomatic exit strategy from a war that has just become a massive drain on their economy.
Not to mention their international reputation.
Right. But leverage at a peace table is entirely dependent on the strength, unity, and threat level of the military forces standing behind you.
That makes sense.
So if the Houthis look across the table or look at the intelligence coming from the south and see that the Saudi coalition is literally fighting a two-front war.
Battling the Houthis in the north while bombing its own proxies in the south.
Exactly. The Houthis have absolutely zero incentive to concede anything.
Right. Because if you're the Houthis, you realize your enemy's cost of continuing the war just doubled. You know the Saudis are bleeding resources fighting themselves, so you just stall.
You just wait for them to cannibalize themselves.
Wow. And Saudi Arabia is obviously acutely aware of that vulnerability.
Extremely aware. From the Saudi strategic perspective, the internal clashes in Aden aren't just a local squabble over port authority. They are an existential threat to Riyadh's entire diplomatic exit strategy.
So they needed a way to manufacture overwhelming negotiating leverage, like, immediately.
Yes, the airstrikes were an administrative and military flex.
A very violent flex.
True. They were designed to violently suppress internal dissent, to draw a brutal red line and communicate to everyone, the UAE proxies, the Houthis, the international community, that Riyadh is the ultimate authority.
That there is only one agenda.
Exactly.
I mean, it is forced cohesion. They are attempting to bomb the coalition back into a state of unity.
Which is quite the paradox.
Yeah, because you cannot bomb your way to genuine political trust. Once you cross the line of calling in airstrikes on your own side, the alliance is essentially a zombie.
The zombie alliance. That's a good way to phrase it.
It might still walk and talk like a coalition, but the core trust is completely dead.
The internal trust is completely shattered, yes. But from Riyadh's perspective, the violence serves its immediate purpose of freezing the southern battlefield so they can try to salvage their position at the peace table.
Just buying time, basically.
Pretty much. However, focusing solely on the Saudi-UAE proxy fight still leaves out the largest piece of the puzzle here.
Oh, right. The nested dolls.
Yeah. The source material makes a very specific point. You cannot understand the fracturing of Yemen without zooming out and looking at the massive, overarching regional power dynamics.
We have to look at the geopolitical fault lines. Because a local earthquake in Aden triggers a massive tsunami across the entire Middle East.
Absolutely. The intra-coalition rivalries we just dissected intersect directly with the broader Iran-Saudi Arabia regional proxy competition.
And that is the macro-level conflict shaping the entire theater.
It is. For decades, Iran and Saudi Arabia have been locked in this shadow war for regional hegemony, funding opposing sides in conflicts across the Middle East.
And Yemen is simply the most volatile and direct battleground of that larger Cold War.
So if we trace the fault lines from the ground up, you really see how it all stacks together.
Let's do a quick, rapid revision recap for the listeners so we can tie it all together.
Good idea. So at the local level, you have the civil war between the internationally recognized government and the Houthi movement.
Right. Then, layered on top of that, you have the coalition dispute we've been talking about. Saudi Arabia trying to keep the state unified while UAE-backed forces try to carve out the south.
And then swallowing all of that is the regional power struggle.
Because Iran is widely understood to be backing the Houthis, while Saudi Arabia is leading the intervention against them.
And that interconnectedness means every single tactical event on the ground in Yemen sends ripples directly to Tehran and Riyadh.
So consider the Iranian perspective on the UAE-backed secessionist movement.
Right. Iran doesn't directly control those southern forces, obviously, but they benefit massively from their actions.
Because it forces Saudi Arabia to look over its shoulder.
Precisely. If the UAE-backed forces weaken the Saudi coalition by fighting for Aden, it forces Saudi Arabia to divert military assets, intelligence capabilities, and financial resources away from the northern front.
Away from fighting the Houthis.
Right. It extends the timeline of the war. It drains Saudi coffers.
For Iran, this is an incredible return on investment.
Unbelievable ROI. Without having to deploy their own troops, Tehran gets to watch their primary regional rival get bogged down in a costly, unwinnable quagmire.
Simply because the anti-Houthi coalition cannot stop fighting itself.
Exactly.
So, if we synthesize all of this for anyone trying to map out the sheer complexity of this conflict, it really starts with geography.
Always back to geography.
Yeah. The UAE-backed forces want autonomy in the south because that specific land gives them control over the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which, as we said, dictates global shipping.
And that geographic ambition creates severe internal security clashes within the coalition.
Right. And then those security clashes force Saudi Arabia to launch highly counterintuitive military strikes against its own proxies.
All just to maintain a facade of strength for the Houthi peace talks.
And finally, all of this local and coalition-level fragmentation is just one theater in the massive Iran-Saudi geopolitical rivalry.
The local ambitions dictate the security strategy.
Yeah.
And the security strategy gets manipulated by the regional Cold War. It's a vicious cycle.
The cause and effect chain is so vital to grasp here because, it is very easy to look at the news coming out of Yemen and dismiss it as a localized tragedy that doesn't impact the rest of the world.
It happens all the time. People tune it out.
But when you understand that this deep political fragmentation, this internal proxy war, is happening right on the shores of one of the world's most vital maritime choke points, the stakes change entirely.
The stability of the global supply chain is indirectly tethered to whether or not these coalition factions can stop shooting at each other.
It's incredibly sobering to look back at the mandate from 2015.
Just push back the Houthis and restore order.
Right. That singular mission has completely devolved. It is splintered into competing strategic visions today, making the prospect of actual lasting peace exponentially more difficult.
Because you have Saudi Arabia desperately needing a unified neighbor for its own border security.
And UAE-backed forces prioritizing their own local autonomy and control over the ports.
The divisions haven't just weakened the military campaign. They have rewritten the entire political landscape of the country.
It leaves the region in a deeply precarious place. And, the source material's conclusion is quite stark.
It really is. It states that lasting stability relies on reconciling the intra-coalition differences while simultaneously addressing the wider regional power contest.
Which is a massive hurdle.
Yeah. But if we look at the deep-seated nature of these fractures, it leaves us with a rather profound question to consider.
I think we need to hear it. Give the listener something to really mull over.
Okay, think about this. We spent so much time analyzing the overarching proxy war between the major regional powers, right?
Right, the whole Saudi versus Iran dynamic.
But consider this. If the broader Iran-Saudi rivalry were somehow miraculously resolved tomorrow.
Like if Riyadh and Tehran signed a comprehensive peace treaty.
Exactly. Shook hands, completely walked away from the conflict. Would Yemen actually find peace? Or are the internal fractures over southern secession and the fierce, localized fight for control over the global leverage of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait now so deeply entrenched that they have taken on a life of their own?
That's a huge question.
Have the proxy forces fundamentally outgrown the masters who initially armed them?
That is a chilling thought. The idea that the original architects of the war could walk away, but the fire they started has mutated into something that just fuels itself.
A conflict within a conflict.
Destined to keep splintering long after the regional giants leave the stage. I mean, the geopolitical X-ray of Yemen isn't just murky, it is a completely different landscape than it was a decade ago.
Completely different.
It's definitely something you have to keep your eye on. Well, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.